what's baseline protocol for the university regarding storms, like what we had last week or similar to it?
Can we go back and start about talking about how the weekend kind of started to unfold?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine.
Typically, and I looked back after everything was over, what we typically do when there's any kind of weather event forecasted, particularly when we know it's going to change, we do put out a notice to returning students. That's something we do a day before, a couple of days before, if there's any kind of weather event forecasted. I think I've done 4 or 5 over the years, over Thanksgiving break, spring break, when there's any kind of storms or anything forecasted. We put out that notice. And we continue to monitor the weather throughout the weekend or throughout the next day, whatever the time frame is. And then we'll look at putting out an advisory when and in this case, the forecast changed again, so we put out the advisory. And again, we're monitoring. This isn't just a one and done thing. We started looking at this maybe Thursday or Friday and what was going to happen. But as you know, the forecast changed numerous times, even overnight. I think Saturday into Sunday it changed. And we talked to area meteorologists, we talked to area law enforcement, we talked to area emergency management and disaster specialist. We look at Illinois Storm Trackers, National Weather Service, Weather Channel. So there's a few of us that are monitoring things and staying in touch. This might happen, that might happen. And from there, we move forward with decisions. So the advisory was posted, I believe, by 10:30 in the morning Sunday. And then later that night, we made the decision to close, and that was after, the forecast changed. We were hearing from area personnel that roads were getting bad quickly, they were closing, and we made the decision to close. So it's a very dynamic process that can just be a notice, can be an advisory, can be a closure, or a combination of 3 like we saw this weekend. And that is pretty unusual.
Right. I want to ask, this was fairly unique in that it was a busy travel day. We had students coming back from wherever on that Sunday. I think it's safe to say dozens, if not more, students were stranded across the state. At what point did student safety come into play in your decision making?
So what I'll say is student safety is always our primary concern, specifically when we're talking about any risk or emergency management type of issues. I mean, we always talk about life safety, property preservation, things of that nature, but life safety is always how we make our decisions. And so, I mean, that entire time, as Darcy shared with you, we were engaging local professionals, law enforcement officials, meteorology individuals. So, I mean, that entire time, the primary focus is student safety and what is in the best interest of not only our students, but our faculty and staff as well.
I want to go through a timeline of events, starting with Friday evening when I had emailed you about if there was talk of not even a closure, but just in general, if there was talk about how the school was going to handle the storm, because at that point, I think we knew, although weather is unpredictable, it wasn't going to be a small storm. The next morning, which would have been Saturday at 7, our news director emailed you again about if there was any new information or any information at all, because at that point there was nothing out from the university about the storm the next day, to which you responded to the both of us saying that a notice was going to go out that morning, which it did, 12:45. You had sent out the notice about being cautious when driving the next day. How come that didn't go to students via mass email? I mean, it was posted to social media, but it wasn't sent to students via their email account.
Do you want to talk about WEAS and how
Sure.
we use WEAS?
So we, when we gather information from students, specifically for communicating with them for an emergency purpose, we take that very seriously. So When we indicate when you're providing that information, it will only be used for a specific purpose. So we don't communicate with students about basketball games or things of that nature. So historically, we have only communicated with students via email, text message, or a phone call, or all three, if you will, for in the event of a closure or certain types of events. We only utilize that system for campus closure or for something that we need to immediately notify students about. What we want to be careful not to do is utilize that email platform all of the time, and then those messages are not taken as seriously. So I would say historically we have never communicated an advisory over the email. We've always posted that information to our website.
And to local media.
And to local media as well. Yeah, and social media as well.
So at 11:45, that notice went out. The first sign of rooms being available to rent at Olson was posted at 1:23 to be exact, Saturday afternoon by Housing and Dining, but that wasn't a part of the original release. What point was that decided upon to offer rooms at Olson?
Rooms are always available at Olson over break housing. That's a question to ask of housing, but I did find out the protocol for that. They always have break housing because there's some people, international students, for example, who can't easily go home during a break, particularly during a week-long break. So that's always available at Olson. I did check because someone had asked about that, I think, and then I added it to the advisory. But I had to get information from Mr. Roselieb in housing because that's something that's never really been asked or come up before.
The next morning, which would have been Sunday, the advisory went out to students and faculty. That again wasn't sent out via mass email, it was just social media. So is that another thing that you would consider not to be appropriate for sending out via email?
Say it's historically we've maintained that system is utilized for emergency communication only.
Okay. The first email that was sent to students was the campus closure Sunday evening with the amount of students that were stranded, some at shelters, some at warming centers. Was it too late? Do you think it was too late at that point to have just then issued the closure?
I'd say it was about 8 o'clock that we were receiving notification from local law enforcement that they were starting to close roads and that the roads were getting bad. So we went with what we were hearing from individuals who were out in that. We were prepared to make a decision when we all came together and we had talked to others. Hindsight's 20/20. I can't answer should we have closed earlier. Again, it seemed to get very bad very quick, and we were relying on people who were out in the field, our emergency operations person, our local law enforcement, who were giving us updates on that. When we heard from the sheriff, we acted very quickly.
I want to go back and talk a little bit more about Olson. Why was it necessary to house students at Olson and not open up the residence halls just a few hours before? I mean, they opened officially at 10 a.m. the next morning. How come they weren't just open the night before?
Unless you want to feel that, what I'll say is neither one of us really we don't provide any oversight, and that's not either one of our areas of expertise. So we could either certainly be glad to get that information and forward it to you in an email, or it might be helpful if you wanted to ask a few of those questions of either Joe Roselieb or John Birnbaum.
I can answer just based on what I saw Mr. Roselieb post on some of those very similar questions on Facebook. One of the things they do over breaks, they use that for more invasive maintenance to lessen university costs as well. They don't need to have OPS patrol the halls. We don't have staff here. A lot of our housing staff are students, the RAs, the complex directors, so they're not here during the week that we're on break because the halls are closed, other than the limited number of staff who are in Olson Hall. So the fact of the matter is not a lot of the staff were available. So Do you just open up Tanner and let students stay there in someone else's room? That's not an ideal situation or answer either. The best possible solution they found was Olson Hall for students who wanted to check in early, and then they made a student rate available.
What was, and you may not know this, but what's the difference in staff of that at Olson Saturday night compared to what would be at any of the other halls?
Well, Olson is staffed during breaks because, as I said, there are students who may be using Olson Hall as their residence during breaks when school's not in session. But again, so they would have staffing online there already, but it's a much smaller population as well, so you don't have an RA on every floor. It's more of a hotel-like atmosphere in Olson Hall over the breaks. It's a conference center. We use that for our camps, and a lot of visitors use that. Anyone can rent a room in Olson Hall. We've used that as emergency shelters before and things like that as well. I think it's made available for the community if there was a mass disaster or something like that. But again, any housing related questions would be Joe Roseleave. And I can set that up for you.
And we did see him. I mean, he did publicly comment on many of our posts regarding questions
Yes.
that were asked by students and people here in town about why they weren't open. And he did mention staff. But your personal opinion, I mean, does it warrant having that kind of staff there to open the residence halls back up to students
To open
anyhow?
all 9 or 10 residence halls the day before a weather event and get all the staffing back in. The logistics in that, I would imagine, wouldn't be.
Well, and I wasn't saying to have the staff back, but is staffing? Do you think it's required? I mean, do you think that the staff needed to be there in order to open the residence halls back up?
In my personal opinion, yes. They have a job to do. They ensure the safety of their residents, order within the residence hall, ensure that rules and policies are being adhered to. I'd say definitely.
Another reason he gave for not opening the residence halls back up was because of absence of dining facilities. Other universities, colleges around the area had students come back early, but didn't open up their dining centers. Why not just have students fend for themselves that Saturday evening like many of the other schools?
I don't even know how many residence halls. I know Monmouth College did, and then they ended up closing as well. I can't answer to what other schools did compared to what we did. We always look back at something, we take notes, we learn from each situation. Will we handle it differently next time? It will depend on the situation. Again, if we allowed students to fend for themselves, does every student have food in their room? Can they get a local pizza delivery driver to deliver pizza in a blizzard? Those are hypothetical questions, but I think the staffing is the most important thing to remember, that we can't have 4,000 students moving back in and not having the staff available.
I want to give you this. This was a message that we received from a mother Saturday night, and got some more information from her Sunday. She had tried to call Olson after the fact that it was open.
I saw this message.
What kind of answer can you give her as to why nobody answered at Olson that was open to students? She tried to call just about every other extension on campus, which that would make sense, that she couldn't get a hold of anybody, but they ended up having to put her daughter in a hotel, as many parents did. What would you tell her?
I'd have to check with housing to see why no one answered the phone, because we had the phone number available for students and parents to call to get a room. So that's something, again, I would have to check with housing, and that's what I would tell the mother. I would apologize profusely. I hope someone from housing has reached out to her and explained the situation. I don't know why someone didn't answer the phone, because the front desk was staffed.
But in terms of reaching someone during a time where many offices on campus would have been closed, our Office of Public Safety is always open and someone would have always answered the phone there. So maybe that's something else that we can
Right.
communicate better, that
That's a good
in
point.
the event of a break or something of that nature, or when the or most of the campuses or campus offices are closed, that the Office of Public Safety is always open and would be willing to answer, or is obviously there to answer the phone. And if they don't have the information right away that the mother may have needed, they would have been able to put her into contact with someone or to have someone reach back out to her to answer her questions.
I know that this, like I said earlier, was a unique situation because it happened on one of the busiest travel days of the year, not just here, but across the country. But how will the university use this to their benefit for the next time that this happens, whether or not it's a travel day?
So I think regardless of whether or not it's a busy travel day, anytime that we do anything like this, anytime the campus is closed, whether, for example, the tornado warning message that we issued Saturday, was it, I believe? Every time we do things like that, we evaluate, is there an opportunity to have done this better? Is there something that we could do better next time? I mean, I think and we don't even wait necessarily for one of those issues to happen. We're always talking about ways that we could do better. Or I came across a website on XYZ University, and they have this particular site. We've talked about one recently. Do you think that would be helpful to have here? So we're always kind of brainstorming about ways to do things better. And quite honestly, we have individuals who provide feedback, and we don't take that lightly. When someone makes a recommendation, now, can we do everything that everyone would like for us to do? Probably not. But we do take people's suggestions seriously, and if it's something that makes sense for us and we can do, well, then it's something that we certainly give consideration to.
So you made a website just for events like this?
For weather.
For people to go
Right.
to? For
Sure.
And it would have resources, it would have OPS's number, it would have a variety, even if we had links to local hotels, to Olson Hall, to a variety of things. And we've already kind of started brainstorming what we would see on that page, winter weather safety tips, travel tips, things like that. And it would be this, I'd say, one-stop website that would have all of our weather-related information, particularly during the winter time when the weather's unpredictable and blizzard one weekend, tornadoes the next.
Sure. Links to live weather on both campuses, things like that.
I want to ask, we know that there were a lot of students that tried to make it back Sunday and that didn't necessarily happen. What do you say to those students that were stranded Sunday?
I would personally say that we're glad they're safe. We're so thankful to our local and area law enforcement and emergency services personnel, to IDOT, to all of the others who were on the road and who really worked tirelessly to find not just students but anyone who was stranded on the road, because there were a lot of individuals traveling back. We had faculty and staff who were traveling back from holiday destinations that were stuck in Monmouth and other areas as well. So I'm glad everyone's safe. They made it back to campus. They made it back to our community. And that's in no large part due to the great people who were out there. We had Good Samaritans who were opening their homes to individuals, warming centers. So the community and the area really came together to provide a service. And we saw that 4 or 5 years ago. We had a similar situation where we had a snowstorm come up, started at noon. And by 12:20, we had blowing snow. It started so quickly. We had people at work. It was during a work day. And we sent people home. A lot of people, they shut down 67, and there were people who were trying to get home from Galesburg who were stranded there all night. And again, everyone seems to come out in full force. And I know our sheriff's department, especially, and the county officials, worked so hard to get people out. They looked for our students, and they did a really fantastic job. So to them, I thank them, and to our students, we say, and our faculty and staff, we're glad they're safe, and they made it back.
Absolutely.
Illinois winters are unpredictable and oftentimes unforgiving. I sometimes wonder why I live in the Midwest, given the changes in weather. Again, tornadoes one weekend,
Yep.
blizzard the next. But we'll always evaluate our policies and procedures and learn from them and learn, like Digger said, how we can do better. And we do take this feedback. I don't like to see messages like this. It bothers me when parents are worried. As a parent myself, of course, I worry about college-age students and such, and everyone who's affiliated with our university. So it's something we do take seriously, and we'll always monitor the weather. And we're excited about the new Doppler radar that's going to be housed on campus, because that will give us an even greater look at what's happening in our region, rather than relying on a National Weather Service maybe in the Quad Cities or Quincy or elsewhere.
Anything else you'd like to add about the university and the storm?
I don't think so.
No, I think
Okay.
we covered it. Thank you.
Thank you.